I'm getting ready to do a demonstration of a water scene, with reflections in the water, and it's just a simple practice that you can do over and over again, which helps loosen you up if you're getting ready to paint a finished painting, or if you're getting ready to go into a painting session or something. This is a good way for you to start. It's free form. You can just throw paint on and sketch out my little simple uh, areas that I'm going to be painting. And you saw the line that I drew across almost way at the top. And basically, what I did was I separated a tree line from the water line. And now, after I've mixed several colors in my palette, I'm just loosely laying those colors on the paper. And what I want you to notice is that the brush is loaded with paint. It's not just uh, so little amount of paint in the brush that when you start painting, it already looks like the brush is empty and you've got streaky lines. You see that that brush is loaded and full, and the paint that I'm laying on is nice and wet. The little squiggles that I was just doing there at the bottom, I'm trying to give the effect of a little grass growing in front of those trees. And you see I'm doing it along the way. I don't want to paint all the way across. You see, I'm doing it again. I don't want to paint all the way across and then have to come back, because sometimes the paint might have dried. It's going to take a while for this to dry, though, because, as I said, I painted it nice and wet. And the reason why I am painting this nice and wet, because I want it to stay nice and wet until I'm done painting the trees all the way across, because then I'm going to go back and scrape out some trees with a scraping technique where you can use several different items. The end of a brush, you can use um, a charge card. In this case, I'm going to be using a razor blade. And so before I do that, this paint has got to dry a little bit. So in the meantime, I'm took the brush. You saw I just put it at the bottom, and what I wanted to do was to soak up some of those puddles that were along the bottom. So I dried my brush out again and just soaking up some of those puddles. When your brush is nice and dry, then it can act like a sponge. So here we go, just pressing that razor blade down and just pulling it across. And what you're really doing is you're moving paint out of the way. And if what you painted was dry enough, then the paint is going to stay moved out of the way, and you'll end up with a negative looking effect. You see, it's turning out lighter. If you do this scraping when it's really, really wet, though, that paint will come back into where you scraped, and it'll look darker. So it depends on what you want. I wanted the negative effect, so the paint is just at that right amount of drying. It's not too dry, not too wet. As you practice this, you'll get a feel for when it's dry enough or when it's right. And sometimes you can test a little piece and you'll see, okay, not quite dry. You wait a little while, test it again, then it's perfect. But once it's perfect, then it's time to go ahead and go, and all of the trees you want to put in, all the symbols of trees, you need to go ahead and do it. So now I'm pretty much done with that. Again, this is just a practice piece. I'm not looking for total realism or finished painting. I'm just practicing. I'm going to wet all of that bottom where the water is going to be. It's going to move pretty fast now, because once I wet that, I need to go ahead and paint it. So you see I'm laying some water in there, and on the whole area where I'm going to want water to be needs to be wet. And I'm going to wet it real good. I'm going to make sure that the paper is saturated with water. So as I paint the next few steps, it'll stay wet long enough for me to do what I have to do. And you'll see those steps as we go. But basically, I've got to wet this real good. I've got to paint the water in, and I want it to be darker at the bottom than at the top, because then that gives the feeling of perspective and distance. It looks like at the bottom of the painting the water is closer to you, and at the top where it gets lighter, it's further away. So you see I'm still going across and making sure that's nice and wet with water, and that the water is not just on the surface of the paper, but it's actually soaked into the paper. Okay, here we go. A nice dark blue. It's not tube blue. I've put a dark color in there to tone it down some. And I started at the bottom with the darker, and as I paint up, since that paper is so wet, water gets in the way of each stroke and mixes in, and it makes it lighter as we go. So yeah, there you go, another dark coat, and I'm just going from bottom to top, and you'll see it'll gradually get lighter because more and more water is being added into your brush. And I'm just kind of eyeballing it while I paint it, and I'm trying to look to see that it's pretty even. It'll continue to blend even more as we go and get more even, but I just want the brush strokes that I do to be pretty evened out. So now that the water is done, and it's time for me to put those reflections in, again, I need to do it while it's wet. So I'm going to get some color now, but the color that I'm getting ready to put in my brush needs to have less water in it than what I was just using. Because if it has less water, it's just really going to soak in. Watch this, and you'll see that this paint now is kind of staying there. It's blending, but it's kind of staying where it is. It's not just fading away into the wet water. So you want to be sure to have less water when you're painting paint on top of wet paint. Otherwise, it just kind of blends in. It all becomes muddy. So the same way I did the trees, I am now doing the reflections of the trees all the way across. And I'm not really trying to match the reflections colors perfectly with the trees on top colors. That really doesn't matter. You don't have to be perfect about that. You see I'm taking the bristles on the brush and pushing them to try to get one of the hairs from the brush out of there. May as well do it now, because if you let it dry, where that hair is, it'll leave a white spot because the paint will dry around it. Okay, I should be ready to bring the razor blade in now, and because if there are reflections of trees, there's also going to be reflections of the trunks of the trees. So you'll see a whole bunch more scraping now. Soaking up some of those puddles down there, and one of the reasons why I'm doing that now, first of all, the puddle doesn't need to be there because it'll keep pulling back into the painting as the painting dries. But I'm also giving the water a chance to dry up a little, the same way those trees needed to be at the right amount of drying. This water needs to be too, so that when I scrape, it'll stay scraped out. So here we go. I'm starting to scrape those trees out, and now I am trying to match wherever there's a tree. I'm trying to scrape the reflection of the tree directly below it. And if my tree up on top was angling, let's say, towards the left or to the right, then I'm going to try to angle my reflection the same way. If it's straight down, then I'll try to put it straight down. If I mimicked some branches on the tree, then I'm going to mimic some upside down branches in the water. So again, as you can see, this is just a very quick, loose exercise that you can do that gets you ready for painting, or it can end up being a nice finished painting. So you practice this and you work with it, and just keep working until you get it the way you want it. I mean, as far as colors are concerned, the consistency of the painting is concerned, whether you've got it as dark at the bottom and as light at the top of the water as you want it, how detailed you want the trees to be, whether or not those scrapings scraped out light or scraped out dark the way you wanted it to. Keep working on it until you've mastered it and you get this to look the way you want it to look. And now I'm going to take a dry brush and try to pull out some paint going across to kind of mimic, how sometimes the sun can kind of reflect light across the water.